If anyone asked me now which clause in that 37-page contract was the hardest to keep, I wouldn't need to think twice. It wasn't the confidentiality clause. It wasn't the clause forbidding me to disclose the schedule. It wasn't even the clause demanding I be available 24 hours a day. It was the very first line. Must not develop feelings for Ezra Bennett in any form whatsoever. The first time I read it, I laughed out loud. The last time I read it, I already loved him so much that just seeing the name Ezra was enough to make my heart ache. This is a story that began with a promise both of us were far too confident we would never break. There's a secret fans never knew. Every time Ezra Bennett stepped onto the red carpet with his perfect smile, a few minutes earlier, the person kneeling on the floor to tie his shoelaces was always me. I'm Rowan, 23 years old, born in Portland, raised in an ordinary family, studied communications at UCLA on a mix of scholarships, part-time jobs, and a student loan I'd probably need more than 10 years to pay off. If there's anything special about me, it's that I never dreamed of working for a celebrity. Really, my classmates always dreamed of making it to Hollywood, meeting actors, working at a studio, showing up at glamorous parties. Me, I just wanted a stable job, one that covered rent, my morning coffee, and let me call my mom on weekends without having to lie that everything was fine. I thought my life would follow a very ordinary path. Graduate, apply for jobs, go to work, maybe adopt a golden retriever a few years later, find someone, get married, a quiet life, until the day I got a call at 7:12 in the morning. That call yanked me out of my ordinary life and threw me headfirst into Ezra Bennett's world. I'm looking at your... The voice on the other end belonged to a woman. Clear, calm, professional. I'm Olivia, Ezra Bennett's manager. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. I'm sorry, who? Ezra Bennett. I went silent. Not because I didn't know the name, because the whole country knew it. The 28-year-old man who kept topping the box office. The youngest actor to win 2 major film awards 3 years in a row. A singer with millions of followers. A face on billboards from New York to Los Angeles. The man the press called America's boyfriend, even though he'd never publicly dated anyone. I think you have the wrong person. I don't have the wrong person, she answered immediately. Professor Daniel Miller at UCLA recommended you. I remembered then. 3 weeks earlier, my professor had asked if I'd be interested in a temporary assistant job. He never said it was for Ezra Bennett. If I'd known, I might have refused, not because I hated celebrities, but because I understood they lived in a completely different world. My world was a library open 24 hours, discounted pizza for students, buses running late, essays turned in at the last minute. Their world was bodyguards, cameras, private jets, rumors, hundreds of thousands of eyes tracking every step. The two worlds were never meant to meet. I'd like to invite you to an interview, Olivia continued. 10 a.m. tomorrow. You can say no. Of course. But Professor Miller said if Ezra needed someone he could trust, you were the first person he thought of. The call ended. I stood frozen in the small kitchen. My roommate, Mason, poked his head out. What's going on? I turned to him. I'm about to interview to be Ezra Bennett's assistant. Mason looked at me. 5 seconds. Then burst out laughing. Even jokes have limits. I'm not joking. I don't believe you. You can listen to the recording. Mason snatched my phone. Read the number. Looked it up. Then slowly turned to stare at me like I just won the lottery. Holy. That's actually Ezra's management company's number. The next morning, the building where the interview took place looked nothing like anywhere I'd ever been. No flash. No crowd of fans. No paparazzi. Just a quiet glass building in the middle of Beverly Hills with security so tight I had to scan my ID 3 times before I could go in. There were 6 candidates in the waiting room. Everyone dressed perfectly. Thick resumes. I was the only one still carrying a college backpack. A girl sitting next to me smiled politely. Have you ever worked as an assistant before? No. Experience in entertainment? No. Do you know anyone famous? No. She nodded politely. Her eyes said it clearly. You don't stand a chance. Honestly, I thought so too. Until the door opened. A man in a black hoodie, cap, and face mask walked in. Nobody noticed. The janitor in the hallway even nodded at him like he was greeting an ordinary employee. He pulled off the mask. The whole room fell silent instantly. Ezra Bennett. No makeup. No stage lights. No star's smile. Just a man who looked a little tired, with faint shadows under his eyes and hair that hadn't been styled yet. The first thing I thought wasn't, he's so handsome. It was, he looks so lonely, and I had no idea. That very first glance would become the beginning of a story that would force both of us to break a promise we thought could never be broken. The moment Ezra walked into the room, the atmosphere shifted so much it felt like someone had turned down the volume on the whole world. No more keyboard clatter. No more rustling paper. Even the receptionist standing outside the door unconsciously lowered her voice. But what surprised me most wasn't his fame. It was his eyes. I'd seen Ezra Bennett in countless interviews. On TV, he always smiled at the right moments, answered cleverly, knew how to make an entire room laugh with a single line. But the man standing in front of me now carried a kind of exhaustion no camera had ever captured. Not the tired of sleeplessness. The tired of being a flawless version of himself for far too long. Sorry to keep everyone waiting. His voice was deeper and slower than on television. I don't like screen interviews. I want to meet the people who'll be working with me in person. He sat at the head of the table. He didn't look at the resumes right away. Instead, he studied each of us. Not evaluating. More like trying to read who we actually were. I don't need the best assistant. His first sentence made all of us look up. I need someone I can trust. A long pause. Talent can be learned. Skills can be trained. But trust can't. He smiled faintly. So today, I'm not going to ask much about your resumes. A few candidates started to look uneasy. I was even more confused. If not about experience, what was he going to ask? The first person was called into a private interview room. Came out 15 minutes later. Face tense. No one knew what had happened inside. The second. Then the third. My turn. I took a deep breath and walked in. The room wasn't big. Just a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a window looking down over a sunlit Los Angeles. Ezra was standing by the window. When I walked in, he turned. Rowan? Yes. Sit. I'd barely sat down when he pushed the folder toward himself. Professor Miller says you're the most punctual student he's ever taught. I laughed, embarrassed. I don't know if that's a compliment or a complaint. Punctuality is always a compliment. He closed the folder. I have a few questions. Okay. Have you ever lied? I blinked. Yes. He nodded. Good. I thought I'd misheard. Good. If you'd said never, I'd have ended this interview right now. I laughed for the first time. Ezra laughed too. The air loosened considerably. Next question. If a reporter offered you $1 million to reveal a secret of mine, I'd refuse. Why? Because if I said yes, there'd always be someone offering $2 million after that. He looked at me for a few seconds. The corner of his mouth curved up slightly. Interesting answer. He continued. If I yelled at you in front of other people? Depends on the reason. He raised an eyebrow. If I was wrong, I'd apologize. If I wasn't wrong, I'd wait until it was just the two of us, then ask why. Why wait? I wouldn't want to embarrass you. This time Ezra said nothing. He just looked at me quietly. That gaze made me a little self-conscious. I thought I'd just given a wrong answer, but he only gave a slight nod. Last question. He leaned back in his chair. Why do you want this job? This was the easiest question. I need the money. He laughed. Honestly, very honestly. Anything else? I want the experience. That's it. I thought for a few seconds, then answered truthfully. I think. Behind people who are very famous, there usually aren't many people who treat them like an ordinary person. Ezra froze. That was the first time since he'd walked in that I saw him completely unguarded. What do you mean? I don't know. I shrugged. Maybe I'm wrong. But since I walked in here, everyone's looked at you like a star. No one's asked you today if you're tired. The room went strangely quiet. Outside the glass, a helicopter passed overhead, the soft hum of the air conditioner. Ezra bowed his head, his hand turning the pen over and over. After a while, he finally spoke. Today, I really am very tired. That wasn't an actor's answer. Not a polite line. It was the truth. And I don't know why. Hearing him say that, my heart suddenly sank. He stood up. Thank you, Rowan. The interview is over. I stood up too. At the door, I turned back. I hope you have a less tiring day. He looked at me, didn't smile, just gave a small nod. Thank you. The next afternoon, while I was sitting in the library finishing my graduation essay, my phone buzzed. An email from Bennett Entertainment. My heart raced. I opened it immediately. Congratulations, Rowan. You have been selected as temporary executive assistant to Ezra Bennett for a 6-month term. I read it over 3 times, then got to the attachment. The employment contract. 37 pages. The first page was all legal terms. The second, confidentiality. The third, the work schedule. I skimmed through quickly, until one bolded line caught my eye. Clause No. 1. For the duration of this contract, the assistant shall not develop, pursue, or maintain any romantic or personal relationship beyond the scope of employment with artist Ezra Bennett. I laughed out loud right there in the library. A few students turned to look. I muttered to myself, fall for the boss? No way. At that moment, I had absolutely no idea that 6 months later, that very naive remark would become the thing I'd be most embarrassed about whenever I remembered it. I signed the contract on a Monday morning. No welcome ceremony, no long orientation, just a wooden table, a black fountain pen, and Olivia, the manager who'd worked with Ezra for nearly 10 years. She looked at me for a long time before setting the contract down. Rowan. Yes. There's something I want to say before you start. Her voice was calm, but far more serious than it had been on the phone. The first clause in that contract isn't there for show. I smiled. I understand. No. Olivia shook her head. You don't understand yet. She crossed her arms. Over the past 3 years, Ezra has gone through 11 assistants. I froze. 11? Some lasted 3 days. Some lasted 2 months. Some quit within the first week. Why? Olivia didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed me a keycard. Everyone thinks they can separate the job from their feelings. Then one day they realize they can't. I laughed lightly. I think I'll be fine. Olivia looked at me with an unreadable expression. They all said that too. 7 in the morning. The first address I had to go to wasn't the office. It was Ezra's penthouse in West Hollywood. I'd imagined a superstar's home would look like something out of a movie, sprawling as a hotel, packed with bodyguards, dazzlingly extravagant. But when the elevator doors opened, the first thing I saw was a pair of sneakers lying carelessly in the hallway, a jacket slung over the back of a chair, and a gray cat sleeping right in the middle of the living room. I blinked. Hello. The cat opened one eye, looked at me, then went back to sleep. That's Winston. A voice came from behind me. I turned. Ezra was standing in the kitchen. White t-shirt, gray sweatpants, hair still a little damp. In his hand was a frying pan. I'm making breakfast. He glanced at the small suitcase in my hand. Right on time. I don't like being late. Very good. The smell of pancakes filled the apartment. I hadn't expected a celebrity to cook for himself. As if reading my mind, Ezra shrugged. If I ate takeout every day, I'd probably die young. I laughed. I thought famous people had personal chefs. I do. But today I felt like doing it myself. He set a plate down on the table. Have you eaten? Yes. My stomach betrayed me instantly. Growl. The whole room went silent. Ezra looked at me, then burst out laughing. It was the first laugh I'd heard from him outside the interview. Not forced. Not polite. Genuine enough that the corners of his eyes crinkled. Rowan. Yes? You're a terrible liar. I blushed. I woke up late. So you haven't eaten? No. He pulled out the chair across from him. Sit down. You don't have to. I hate eating alone. Just one simple sentence. I don't know why, but it made me feel like this huge apartment had grown used to loneliness a long time ago. While we ate, Ezra didn't bring up work at all. He asked about school, about my major, about Portland, whether I liked coffee or tea. The conversation was so easy I forgot I was sitting across from one of the most famous people in America. Until Olivia's phone rang. She hurried in. Ezra, there are paparazzi at the garage gate. 5 of them. More than usual. The smile on Ezra's face vanished almost instantly. He set down his fork. Let's go. In just 3 minutes, everything changed completely. A makeup artist appeared. A stylist brought in clothes. Bodyguards lined the door. The white t-shirt turned into a perfectly tailored navy suit. His hair was restyled. Light makeup made his face glow. The man who had just laughed with me in the kitchen was gone. Standing in front of me now was the Ezra Bennett the whole country saw on screen. I stood there, stunned. Ezra adjusted his cuffs. Noticing me staring, he smiled. Very different, huh? Very. Which version do you think is more me? He thought for a few seconds, then answered so quietly I almost missed it. The one eating pancakes. The car had barely pulled out of the garage when dozens of cameras swung toward the tinted window. Flashes went off nonstop. Someone shouted, Ezra, look over here. Who are you dating? Is it true you're doing a new movie? I flinched. Ezra didn't. He simply smiled at the perfect angle, waved, then sat back down, like he was long used to it. A few minutes after the car pulled away, he finally let out a breath. A very long one. I hate flashes, he said, but I have to pretend to like them. I looked at him. For the fans. No, he shook his head. Because if I frown, tomorrow there'll be 100 articles saying Ezra Bennett is arrogant. I didn't know how to respond. For the first time, I realized fame could be a cage too. A very beautiful one. A very glamorous one. But still a cage. That day's photo shoot lasted almost 8 hours. I barely had a moment to sit down. Scheduling. Bringing water. Checking emails. Reminding him of the time. Taking notes. By the afternoon, I was completely worn out. And Ezra still had to smile. Photo after photo. During a 10-minute break, I brought him coffee. Americano. No sugar. He took it. Thanks. I looked around. No one else was nearby. Are you okay? Ezra looked up. He seemed surprised by the question. Why do you ask? You've been smiling since this morning. But your eyes aren't smiling. He went quiet, then laughed softly a moment later. You're pretty observant. It's my job. No. He shook his head. It's instinct. Then he looked straight at me. Don't repeat what you just said to anyone. I won't. Why not? Because that's your own business. Ezra gave a very faint nod. For the first time since we'd met, I felt like I'd taken one small step further into his real world. A world with no stage lights, no cameras, just a man trying to smile every single day. And I still had no idea that from that very moment, my heart had already begun drifting away from the first clause of the contract. If I had to pick the very first moment that made me feel this job was unlike any job I'd ever had, it wasn't walking the red carpet with Ezra. It wasn't seeing hundreds of fans calling his name either. It was Friday night of the first week. Around 11 at night. I'd just changed and was about to get into bed when my work phone buzzed. Ezra. It was the first call he'd ever made to me on his own. I answered right away. Rowan? Yes. Are you still up? I am. A pause. No music. No voices. Just steady breathing on the other end. Then Ezra spoke. I'm bothering you. It's fine. I left a document at the office. I need it for the 7 a.m. meeting tomorrow. I could ask someone else, but... He hesitated. Olivia says everyone's already gone home. I'll go get it. I'll send you the address. I can go myself. No need. I cut him off. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He gave a soft laugh. Thank you. The call ended. I threw my jacket back on and rushed down to the garage. Driving to the office, I thought only one thing. This really is the assistant life. There's no such thing as clocking out. After grabbing the document, I drove to Ezra's penthouse. It was nearly midnight. Los Angeles was still glowing bright. When the door opened, Ezra appeared in a cream-colored sweater and sweatpants, completely unlike his polished daytime look. Sorry, he said as he took the document. I should have been more careful. It's fine. I owe you a meal. You already treated me to pancakes. He laughed. True. So I owe you 2 meals now. I was about to say goodbye and leave. But right then my stomach growled again at the worst possible time. Ezra looked at me. I take it you haven't had dinner. I forgot. Today was too busy. He opened the door wider. Come in. You don't need to. I haven't eaten either. For the second time in 1 week, I found myself sitting in Ezra's kitchen. This time pasta. Not made by a chef. Made by his own hands. While the water boiled, he turned to me. You know the first thing I learned once I got famous? No. How to cook in the middle of the night. I laughed. That sounds sad. It is. He didn't deny it. But it's also convenient. Why? Because no restaurant is ever open when I actually feel like going out. I stayed quiet. Another small thing. So ordinary. But for him, it simply wasn't possible. While we ate, Winston jumped up onto the chair beside me. The cat sniffed around, then curled up on my lap like he'd known me forever. Ezra raised an eyebrow. That's strange. Why? He hates strangers. I stroked Winston's back gently. Maybe I have a way with cats. Ezra rested his chin on his hand, watching. No, I think he just likes good people. I laughed. You're giving me too much credit. I'm not giving credit. He said it very naturally. I'm observing. I suddenly remembered what he'd said back in the interview. I need someone I can trust. I don't know why, but I felt happy. A very small feeling, but enough that I found myself smiling without realizing it the whole drive home. 2 weeks passed faster than I expected. Ezra's schedule was so packed I started to memorize it by heart. Monday, commercial shoot. Tuesday, script meeting. Wednesday, recording session. Thursday, photo shoot. Friday, interviews. Weekends, still working. Some days we only slept 3 hours. Some days we flew from Los Angeles to New York and back the same day. Some days we went straight from the airport to set. I started to understand why the previous assistants had quit so fast. Not because Ezra was difficult. The opposite, actually. He always said thank you after everything I did. Always apologized if the schedule was too tight. Always remembered to ask if I'd eaten. What wore people down was the pace of his life. It moved so fast that one moment of distraction and everything fell apart. One evening, while I was arranging the next week's schedule, Olivia came over. Are you doing okay? I'm fine. Really? Of course. She looked at the dark circles under my eyes and smiled. You're the first one in years who hasn't complained. I find the work interesting. Olivia nodded. Ezra says the same thing. I looked up. He talks about me? Yes. He said. She paused, as if weighing whether to say it. Finally, someone who doesn't look at me like I'm a product. I froze. He really said that? Yes. Up until now, most people have always wanted something from Ezra. Fame. A relationship. Money. Opportunities. But you. Olivia looked straight at me. You act like you're just helping out a friend. I laughed lightly. He's my boss. Right? Keep thinking that way. Her voice suddenly turned serious. Don't let things get complicated. I knew she meant the first clause. So I laughed. Don't worry. There's no way I'd fall for my boss. Olivia didn't laugh along. She just looked at me for a long time. Then said quietly, I've heard that line before too. 3 days later, the first incident happened. It was the premiere of Ezra's new film in Hollywood. Thousands of fans lined both sides of the street. Live TV cameras. Flashes going off non-stop. Ezra had just stepped out of the car when a girl of about 12 suddenly broke through the security line. She ran straight toward him, sobbing, "Ezra, I just want to hug you once." Security immediately blocked her. The girl panicked, fell. It all happened in a matter of seconds. No one had time to react, except Ezra. He abandoned the plan entirely, ignored the organizers calling after him, walked straight down the red carpet, crouched in front of the girl. "It's okay," he asked gently. "Are you hurt anywhere?" The girl shook her head through her tears. Ezra pulled a pen from his jacket pocket, signed her jacket, then gave her a gentle hug. "Easy now. Don't run like that again. Okay?" The whole crowd erupted. Cheers roared. Cameras kept flashing. But standing behind him, I only noticed one thing. No camera was pointed at Ezra's face the moment he turned away. And in that exact moment, I saw him quietly rubbing his right hand, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly from pain. I remembered then, 3 days earlier, he'd sprained his wrist while rehearsing an action scene. He shouldn't have used that hand at all. Yet he'd still caught the girl without a moment's hesitation. That was the first time I realized, behind the flawless image the whole country saw, Ezra always put others before himself. And that, I would come to learn, was far more dangerous than I imagined. Because I was starting to admire him. And sometimes, admiration is only a very short step away from love. There's an unwritten rule at Ezra's management company. Never read the comments online after a big event. I learned that rule the next morning. And it was also the day I understood that being famous doesn't just mean being loved. It also means being judged by millions of people every single day. 7 in the morning. I walked into the office with 2 cups of coffee. Olivia was sitting in front of her computer screen, looking more tense than usual. "What happened?" She turned the screen toward me. Dozens of articles. Did Ezra Bennett stage a fan hug for PR? Touching moment or publicity stunt? Hollywood star performing even off-screen? I frowned. But yesterday was clearly unplanned. It was. Olivia took a sip of coffee. But the truth doesn't always get the most clicks. I sat down. How can they even reach that conclusion? Because they don't need to. What they need is for people to click on the article. I scrolled through a few more comments. Some praised him. Some defended him. But there were plenty mocking him too. Some even called Ezra fake. It irritated me so much I set my phone down. Right then, the office door opened. Ezra walked in. Light blue shirt, black trousers, that familiar smile. "Morning." He looked at Olivia. "The 9 o'clock meeting's still on?" "Yes." "Good." He turned to me. "Rowan, have you had breakfast?" I froze. After all those articles, after all that criticism, the first thing he asked me was whether I'd eaten breakfast. When Olivia stepped out to take a call, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Don't you read the news?" Ezra was checking his schedule. "I do." "Doesn't it make you angry?" "It does." "Then how? Are you still so calm?" He closed his tablet, then looked at me. "Do you remember the first thing I said in your interview?" I thought about it. I need someone I can trust, right? So, do you trust what you saw yesterday? Or what other people wrote? I answered immediately. "What I saw." Ezra nodded. "That's enough." He stood up. "If I spent every day trying to explain myself to people who've already decided to hate me, I'd have no time left to actually live." I fell silent. Maybe no one understood how to exist under the spotlight better than he did. That afternoon, we went to a university in San Diego. Ezra had been invited to speak at a career orientation program for students. It was a small event. No live broadcast. Not much press. Just a few hundred students filling the auditorium. For the first time in weeks, I saw Ezra completely at ease. He took off his suit jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves, sat right on the edge of the stage to answer questions. A female student asked, "Do you have any advice for people who want to become famous?" Ezra smiled. "I do. Think it over very carefully. The whole hall laughed. He went on. People usually think the best thing about fame is that a lot of people know who you are. But not many people talk about the worst part, which is that, little by little, you stop knowing who actually knows you. The room went quiet. I'm very grateful to the people who care about me. But there are days I walk into a room full of people and still feel like the loneliest person there. I was standing backstage, watching him quietly. I don't know why. I felt like those words weren't meant for the audience. They were meant for himself. After the talk, a long line of students waited to take photos. A young man, about 20, stepped up last. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. I just wanted to thank you. Ezra smiled. For what? 3 years ago, I was going to end my life. I stiffened. The whole space seemed to freeze. The student took a deep breath. That night I watched an interview of yours. You said, "Don't decide to end your life on a bad day." I still remember that line. I kept going. And today, I'm about to graduate. Ezra's eyes reddened faintly. He hugged the young man, said nothing, just patted his back gently. When the student walked away, I saw Ezra stand there for a long moment, his hands still frozen mid-air, as if his heart hadn't quite made it back yet from that encounter. On the drive back to Los Angeles, no one said a word for almost half an hour, until the car stopped at a red light. Ezra finally spoke. That's why I keep going. Keep going with what? Even when I'm exhausted. Even when I'm misunderstood. Even when I'm hated. If just one sentence can keep one person here, then all of it is worth it. I turned to look at him. The sunset painted half his face orange. He wasn't the famous actor anymore. Wasn't the idol millions adored. He was just a kind man. Kind enough to make you want to protect him. And in that exact moment, I realized I just had a very dangerous thought. If anyone ever hurt him, I would be the first person to stand up for him. That thought had come so naturally that I didn't even notice. It was no longer the thought of an assistant. It was already the thought of someone who'd begun caring about Ezra far more than she should. I still wouldn't call it love, but my heart had quietly taken one more step toward the first clause of the contract.